It's time to make a leap from a life you hate to a life you love. Reclaim your passion and rediscover what it means to live a lifelong dream with God. Let the adventures begin. It's your dream year.
Good morning. How are you guys doing this morning? Pretty good. We had a great. That's awesome. I'm really excited about this series. If you're just joining us, we are in the middle of a series called Dream Year. And the entire premise of the series is this. We believe that God has placed in each and every one of us dreams that are in our heart that we are specifically placed on this earth to accomplish. And yet so many of us fall into a life where we settle for something less. We find ourselves in routine. We find ourselves waking up every morning to a job and a life that we're unsatisfied and unfulfilled in. And so we're trying to find, how do we get back to our dreams? How do we get back to this life that God initially intended for us to have? And when we first started talking about this series, I was really excited about it because Pastor Jason and I started talking about what it would look like, what the content would be. And I was really excited because my wife, Kristen, and I, over about the last 12 to 18 months, we have, microphone? Thank you. Hello. This headset mic hates me. Every time I try to preach, it just goes wild. Anyway, Pastor Jason and I started talking about what would it look like for people to live their dreams? What would that look like? And I was excited about it because really about the last 12 to 18 months of my life and my wife Kristen's life, we've sort of been living this. And if you've been around Access, it's been exciting because you guys have been a part of it. And all my life, as long as I can remember and as long as we've been married, my wife and I had this dream to write and record our own music. We've been leading worship for a long time. We've been doing that for a really long time. But we had this desire to write and record original music and to see other churches using it, to see other churches singing those songs. And truthfully, we just never really did it. It was one of those things that we knew we wanted to do. In fact, we felt strongly that God had called us to do that, but we really just never did it. And then in July of 2013, we kind of put our dream out there. We were literally driving one day and I said, I feel like to the point with this that we're living in disobedience, that we haven't stepped out in some way to do this, and that if we just step out and do it, God's going to provide for us. And so in July of 2013, Kristen and I launched a Kickstarter campaign, which is a fundraising platform, and we basically said, hey, look, we want to record this album. This is what we want to do, and if you want to be a part of it, we would love to see you do that. We want to try to raise $10,000, and we hit that goal of raising $10,000, and then we said we want to step out, and we want to try to hire this producer that's worked with all of these amazing people that we just have loved for years and years, and we stepped out and he took our project. And so in January of last year, we went to Redding, California, and with a group of just amazing musicians and producers and engineers, we recorded a project that we're really proud of and that so many of you in this room were a part of by backing it on Kickstarter or purchasing the album, all those different things. And so we have lived kind of this series that we're talking about. We have lived this moment where you step out and you say, I'm going to put all of my eggs in this basket and I'm going to go after this dream. And so far in the series, we've talked through the life of a guy named Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king. And Nehemiah finds out that the land of his fathers, the land that he came from, Jerusalem, that the walls of that city were in ruins. So this city was completely exposed. It was completely vulnerable to attack. And this made him very upset, very sad, so much so that the king noticed in his demeanor that something was wrong. And so in week one, we talked about how often our dreams are birthed in frustrations. Often our dreams are birthed in needs that we see that we just can't quite shake. That need that you see that just haunts you at night, that just makes you think, man, I could do something about that. And it's so noticeable on Nehemiah that the king one day basically says to him, what is it that's troubling you? And in this moment with the king, Nehemiah says he is troubled by the fact that the walls are down and he would like to rebuild them. He lays out his plan to the king. And so we talked about the importance of understanding your dream and being able to communicate it in that moment where you get an opportunity to speak to someone who can actually do something about it. And so what happens is the king gives Nehemiah the time and the resources that he needs to go and rebuild the wall. He's basically saying, go, fulfill the dream, rebuild the wall. And then last week we had a guest speaker and his name was John Eric. And if you weren't here, check that message out online because it was awesome. And John Eric's worked with some amazing creative organizations like Pixar and NASA and Disney and just all of these different cool people. And he challenged us in so many areas of our dreams, but primarily as it relates to the story of Nehemiah, he talked about the people who were actually involved in the rebuilding of the wall and how they were diligent to do the work that was right in front of them. to build the wall that was right in front of them. And he talked about how God's plan for humanity is your dream. That's plan A, and there really is no plan B. Like, there are things that God has set out for you to do that you have to step out and do, not just for yourself, but for the sake of humanity. And so now we come to this place where something I've learned over the last year, 18 months, as we've walked through the kind of this dreaming process and all of that, is that every dream has opposition. Every dreamer will face opposition. Every dream has its unique challenges. You will not live the life that God's called you to live and not come against some source of opposition at some point. And so from the moment that you verbalize your dream, that you put it out there, there's basically going to be three types of people that come along. The first type of person, it's these people that are just completely for you. They are in your corner. They will do anything and everything they can to see you fulfill your dream. As we walked through the process of recording our CD, Pastor Jason was very much that for us. Every time that we had a new idea or a new need, he was there to do anything that he could to help us get to the place we wanted to be. The second type of people, kind of just under that, are the people that basically are just indifferent to your dream. They don't really care. They're not against you, but they're not for you. They're just the people that they see that you're doing that and they think, oh, good for them, and then they go about their day and they never think about it again. But below the people who are indifferent to your dream are those who actually oppose what it is that you want to do. Those that actually want to see you fail or see you quit or see you ruined in some way. And what's interesting about those kind of people is they don't really need a reason to hate your dream. It's not like they're actually against you starting that restaurant or launching that business or writing that song or recording that CD. What I've found, and I've seen in my own life, is that really most of the time when someone opposes your dream, it's because of the dream that lays dormant in their life. And so as soon as you verbalize your dream, it's a reminder to them of that dream that is completely unused in their life, that they've yet to step out on. And unfortunately, I speak to this from a little bit of a place of experience, because there was a season in my life where I knew beyond anything that I was supposed to step out and do this. And Kristen and I just kept kind of putting it on the back burner and kept putting it on the back burner. And we would go through days where friends of ours we would see would release albums and things like that. And we should be excited for them. And yet there was part of me that didn't want to open iTunes, because seeing what they had done sitting in the iTunes store was a reminder that what I wanted to do was possible and it was attainable, and I just hadn't done it. And so these are the people ultimately that often will oppose your dream. Those who your dream is an indictment on the life that they're living. It's a reminder that their dreams are perishing in the night and they're still waking up to a life that is unfulfilling to them. And this is where we're at in the story of Nehemiah. Because see, when you just verbalize a dream, it's not that much of a threat to people, because they had a dream that they once verbalized, but they did nothing about it, and they expect that you'll do the same. They expect that you're just kind of talking big and it's not actually going to happen. But when the dream actually starts to materialize and you actually start to see that this thing is going to happen, is when the opposition really ramps up. And that's where we're at in chapter 4 of the book of Nehemiah. The Bible says that the walls of the city of Jerusalem are at about half the height they're intended to be. In other words, this thing is happening. Like, there's no doubt from around the city and surrounding areas, the city of Jerusalem, the walls are going up. Nehemiah is succeeding. And so far, leading up to chapter 4, we've heard from 3 enemies so far that have already come against Nehemiah. One is called Sanballat, one's called Tobiah, and one is called Geshem. And if you look, these are located geographically north, east, and south. So he's surrounded on 3 sides. But then when the walls reach the halfway point, a Philistine army called the Ashdodites take notice of this. They see that the dream is happening. They see that it's being realized, and they join forces with these other 3. And as luck would have it, the Ashdodites are located to the west. So now at the point where the walls are halfway up, Nehemiah is literally completely surrounded by opposition. And this is what starts to happen. One of these leaders of one of the armies, who's an enemy of Nehemiah, starts to basically just gather the leaders of these other groups, and he just starts to talk, which is where opposition always starts. And they just start to chatter. And we learn when we're kids that sticks and stones will break our bones, but words will never hurt us. And we quickly learn that that is a lie. It's not true. Not only do words hurt, words can paralyze. Words can sink down so deep in your soul that they take anchor, and you begin to believe those words and act based on what other people have said about you rather than what God has said about you. And so this is what happens. Sanballat gathers these people, and chapter 4, verse 1 says this. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What they are building, if even a fox climbed up on it, it would break down their wall of stones." And so these people who oppose the building of the wall, they're just together and they're kind of chattering. Meanwhile, Nehemiah is doing the business of his dream. He's getting it done. He's building the wall. But his opposition is standing out here and they're just chattering. And what's interesting about opposition is when an enemy comes against you, even though this was written thousands of years ago, this is exactly what it still looks like today. This is exactly how it takes shape. And so I want to look at 5 things that come out of this chatter of opposition, of how opposition comes against you. And it's symptoms that you are having opposition come against your dream. The first symptom is that opposition will attack your personhood and identity. Tracking with chapter 4, it says, when Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews in the presence of his associate and said, "What are these feeble Jews doing?" Not just what are the Jews doing, not just what are they doing, but what are these feeble Jews doing? He starts to attack really who they are. And that's what happens to us when we start to take on our dream. We start to be attacked under who we are. Because if people can get us to feel insecure about who we are, then we're bound to stop chasing our dream. If we can think that we are the problem with the dream process, then that'll stall the entire thing. Number 2 is opposition will attack your motives. Opposition will attack your motives. It says, will they restore their wall for themselves? See, Nehemiah had set out with a completely unselfish ambition to rebuild the wall. In fact, in chapter 1, it talks about how Nehemiah's desire to rebuild the wall was basically out of respect for the generations that came before him and concern for the generations that were still to come. There was no selfish root to his motives, and yet his opposition stands back and says, "Oh, are they gonna rebuild the wall for themselves? Is that what they're doing? They're doing a work for themselves." And in our dreams today, the same thing happens. People come along, thoughts come along that say, really, this dream is just for you. This is just a selfish thing that you want. This doesn't help anybody. This isn't for anybody else. Only you are at the center of this dream. Number 3 is opposition will attack your relationship with God. After it says, will they restore the wall for themselves? It says, will they offer sacrifices? Will they offer sacrifices there? Are they going to use this to glorify God? Like after the walls are up and they're within the safety of their city, what's going to happen? Are they going to sacrifice to God? Are they going to glorify Him? And I think this is a big one for us today, because a lot of times if we have a dream that doesn't seem spiritual enough, we don't want to chase it. And so we have a dream to start a restaurant or start a creative endeavor or whatever it might be. And yet in the back of our mind, we hear this voice that says, well, is that really going to glorify God? I mean, what does that do to glorify Him? What does starting that construction company, what does that do to glorify God? And so if He can separate it from the relationship with God, He can take our motivation to do it. If they can separate us thinking that what we're doing isn't pleasing to God, the dream will be stalled. Number 4 is opposition will attack your ability to accomplish the dream. Now this, I think, is a huge one. This is a huge one because when Kristen and I stepped out to record our CD and do that whole entire process, I've been leading worship for years. She's been leading worship for years. We've been playing for years, writing for years, all of these things. This is an area that we felt really confident in. And yet when we took the step to actually do it, I personally struggled greatly with insecurity and feeling like this is too much. Like we've bitten off more than we should chew. We don't belong here. Like our songs aren't good enough. Our ability isn't there. And I specifically remember this one day we were out in California, and I was recording the vocals for a song that ended up being one of my favorite songs. And I was in this dark vocal room, and I was singing, and it was just going poorly. And I knew it was going poorly. You can feel when it's going poorly. And if you've ever been involved in singing or playing an instrument or really anything that's like a creative work, you know that how you feel and your emotions greatly affect the ability to perform the way that you need to perform. And so I knew what was going on because I was standing in there and I was thinking to myself, this song is no good. Like, why am I spending this money to record this song? And like, my abilities here are just not enough. And I was beating myself up, and it was coming through in the track. And so we were recording, and usually after you finish, there's like this little pause, and the producer's gonna save whatever you just did, and then he's gonna come on in your ear and say, hey, this is what we need to work on, this is what we need to change, let's take another pass at this, let's do this. And so I was just feeling terrible, and the room was dark, which like just played right into the emotions of how horrible I was feeling. And so we stop and we finish, and all of these things are just on top of me, this fear and insecurity, feeling like, oh, we made a horrible mistake. And I hear the audio click on, and I hear the producer say, hey, Jordan, and I'm expecting like direction, instruction of some kind. And he says, listen to me, you're good at this. And I paused for a second, and he said, you're really good at this. He said, in fact, you know what, you're so good at this that lots of people in your church back home and lots of friends and family gave a lot of money for you to be standing there right now because they want to hear what you have to say, and they want to hear it the way you have to say it. So let's take it again. And here's what I know from that. I know that physically I could feel the fear and the insecurity just kind of begin to just melt off of me. And I can tell you that I think in the church and just in the world today, one of the most needed gifts is the gift of encouragement. Because so often we see people who are dreamers, and we see that their dream is happening. My dream was happening. I was standing in a place that I had literally dreamed of standing. And we see those people and we think, well, everything's happening for them, so they must just feel on top of the world. They must just be full of confidence and full of faith. And yet the people who are accomplishing their dreams, it's not that they don't experience fear and insecurity, it's that they're pushing through those things. And sometimes all they need to push through it is for somebody to be the one to say, hey, you're good at this. You're going to make it. You're going to do this. And yet so often we withhold, or worse, we pile on. And we don't need to be the ones to do that. The church needs to be the place that is known for encouragement. The church needs to be the place that is known for building up and for love. And I would challenge everyone in this room to take stock and to evaluate how you're using your influence. Are you using it to build people up, or are you using it to tear people down, or just staying neutral? Because we look at it in our everyday lives, and sometimes we just let opportunities to build people up pass us by, or worse, we pile on. And God help us when we get behind a computer screen where the anonymity of it makes it easy for us to throw stones and promote fear. This is a little bit of a side note, but I'm so tired of Christians being the one to post things that promote fear and saying things like, wake up, America. We don't need people to wake up to fear. There's a lot of people who are already awakened to fear. We need to awaken people to the fact that God is good, He's in control, He's for you, and the sky's not falling. And yet sometimes there's a dreamer who's out there and they're feeling alone and insecure, and all they need is for somebody to step out and say, you're good at this. You're going to make it. You're going to do it. He'll attack your ability to accomplish the dream. We should be the type of people that are pouring gasoline on people's dreams and waters on their fear. We should be the type of people who are fueling what is in the people's hearts. Finally, opposition will attack the quality of your work. At the end of this, another leader pipes in, Tobiah the Ammonite, who is at his side. Verse 3 says, what they are building, if even a fox climbed up on it, he would break down their wall of stones. I feel like this is like the last ditch effort of opposition. Like, they've conceded the fact that this wall is going to happen, so now they just start saying, well, the wall is going to happen, but the wall stinks. And this is the thing that comes along in your dream where they say to you, or where you hear or you feel like, yeah, you're doing it, but really, who cares? Who cares? What you're doing is no good. And so these are 5 areas that opposition will attack you, but the important thing is how Nehemiah responds to these things, because you will face opposition. But when you name it and you know what it looks like and you know what to expect, the important thing is how you respond. And so as we move on in the chapter, in verse 4 we see, and it's number 1 in your notes, to response to opposition, that Nehemiah relies on God. His immediate reaction is to pray, and he says, "Hear us, O God, for we are despised." He turns to the Lord. And I know for me, when I feel like opposition is coming, one of the main things that I want to do is I want to analyze the situation. I want to just step back and really look at the situation and look at myself and see where the problem lies. But Nehemiah turns first to God. Second, Nehemiah reinforces his weaknesses. Verse 13 says, "So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open places, I stationed the people by their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows." In other words, he saw that opposition was coming, and he didn't just ignore it. He didn't just say, "Oh, I see that they're out there, but I'm not going to do anything." He actually sent some of his people to reinforce the weak spots of the wall. Number 3 is he remembers. Verse 14 says, "And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and the officials and to the rest of the people, 'Do not be afraid. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, and your wives, and your homes.'" Nehemiah kind of gathers the troops and he's like, "Listen, remember what the Lord has done for us." And this idea of remembering has always been a tactic of battle. In World War I, the phrase was, "Remember the Lusitania." Mexican-American War, it was "Remember the Alamo." World War II, it was "Remember Pearl Harbor." And what was interesting about those is those were all defeats. Those were all times where we caved to the enemy, and yet Nehemiah does the exact opposite. And he says, "Remember the Lord, remember what he's done for us, and let's fight for our homes and for our city." And number 4, he refused to quit. It says, "From that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah." Nehemiah refused to quit, even in the face of opposition. And what's interesting to this verse, or in this verse to me, is that he split his resources. And so that probably slowed down the process of the dream. A lot of times we get so focused on, we just have to accomplish this. We just have to go, go, go. But Nehemiah took a second and he said, "You know what? We need to send some people to fight for us and some people to stay and build the wall. And to accomplish your dream, you're going to have to do the same thing. You're going to have to step back and realize that the building can't stop, but we also have to fight. You're going to have to build the wall with one hand and fight off the opposition with the other. But ultimately, you have to refuse to quit. You have to be the model of persistence, because if you are sitting out here and you're a writer but you're not writing, or you're a creator and you're not creating, or a manager and you're not managing, then you're living in disobedience. You don't have to wait for a job. You don't have to wait for a position. You don't have to wait for a title. You just have to start, because God's placed that dream in your heart for a reason. God's put that inside you for a reason, and you have to refuse to quit. You will face opposition. It will come against you. But you have to respond by relying on God and fighting back and knowing that that dream is going to come to pass. You're going to see it happen. And in the coming weeks, we're going to talk about what it looks like to see the dream fulfilled and kind of where you go from there. But I just want to encourage you today to refuse to quit. For those of you who are sitting out there and you have a dream, maybe the opposition is what stopped you from even starting. Maybe you've stepped back and you've counted the cost of it and you've said, "I'm going to come up against too many barriers. I'm going to come up against too many problems. And so I'm just not even going to start." Opposition has paralyzed you. Or maybe you're in the middle of a dream that feels like it's all falling apart. You feel like you're surrounded on every side and that you have no chance. But the good news is that God is for you. He will fight for you. And I want to encourage you to keep going. Be persistent. Don't give up. Keep pressing toward it. And you know, when we talk about dreams, I think a lot of times we think of very specific, tangible things. I mean, I've talked about our recording. We've talked about businesses. But maybe your dream is just for your family. For those of us who are parents, all of our dream should be to raise kids that honor and glorify God. All of our responsibility as those who are married should be to have a marriage that exemplifies Christ. Those are the dreams of our heart just as much as projects, just as much as creative endeavors. And these principles are the same. You're going to come against opposition in your family. You're going to come against opposition in your finances. You're going to come up against opposition in your dreams. But you have to push through. You have to rely on God. You have to know that He will fight for you. And you have to be persistent. Will you bow your heads with me this morning? Today I want to pray specifically for anybody that is in that category, anybody that feels like they've got a dream in their heart. They've got something that they know God has put in their heart, but they feel like they're coming up against opposition. Time after time, they just feel like they're being fought against, and it's an uphill battle, like they're walking in quicksand. If that's you, maybe you haven't started, or maybe you're right in the middle of it, would you just raise your hand? You're right in the middle of this dream, but you just feel that everything's coming against you. Yeah, lots. You can put your hands down. And then for others of you, I'm talking about relying on God, and you're sitting out there thinking, I haven't even entered into a relationship with God. Like, I'm not even relying on Him for my life. I haven't even given all that I am over to Him, and I'd like to do that today. And if that's you this morning, if you're sitting out here and you've never entered into a relationship with Christ, no one's looking around, would you just raise your hand and let me know that that's you? Good. Yeah. So I'm going to pray over that first category of people. And God, I just ask that you would give those who have this dream and they feel that everything is coming against them to stop them. God, I pray that you would help them to remember your faithfulness, that you would help them to remember that you are good. And God, that you would help them to fight through and to push through the fear, the insecurity, whatever it is that's holding them back, God, whatever voices are coming against them, whatever people are coming against them, God, that you would know that as they persist, as they push through, that the dream is on the other side of it and that they will see it come to pass. God, that you are good and that you're for them. God, for those that haven't even started the dream because they're afraid of the opposition, I pray that this would be the day and this would be the week that they take that first step, that they start the journey. And God, knowing that they're going to come up against opposition, but knowing that you are greater. And now, if you raise your hand that you want to enter into a relationship with God, just in your own way right now, would you pray that He would come and take over all your life? Just tell Him that you give Him all that you are and you trust Him with your life. And God, we just thank you that you're more than enough for all of these situations, God. You're greater than all of these circumstances. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, look up here. We had quite a few people. We had tons of people who said, hey, I'm right here in the middle of this dream and I feel like I'm coming up against stuff. And we had several people who raised their hands and said, we want to enter into a relationship with God. They just made the best decision that they could possibly make. Can we celebrate that this morning?